Hello and welcome back to the FEZ show. It is Friday the 17th of April and we have some amazing topics to talk to you about today. If you are enjoying the content and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, it's just down below. Give it a hit. And on today's show we've got two amazing members of the FEZ crew. Joining me again is William Dodds and Edward Hunter. Morning boys.
Hiya.
Hey Jack, great to see you. Great to be with you again, and you too, Will.
Yeah, it's great. It's great that we're doing another show. Obviously, big news yesterday, which we're going to touch on because we discussed it in yesterday's show. So if you really want to go into proper depth, have a look at yesterday's show. But Berlin officially postponed. Okay, because it was sort of obvious with the news coming from Angela Merkel on Wednesday when she announced that the large events bans were carrying on to the 31st of August, apologies, and therefore the race in June was very unlikely to happen, and then obviously Formula E confirmed that yesterday. So Will, what did you make of the news?
Yeah, sadly inevitable. I think given kind of what's been said in Germany and kind of what we already knew. Luckily, I think because of the kind of nature of this event and kind of its unprecedented nature, I think that means that we'll be able to be flexible with it and hopefully rearrange. I think that everyone knows that sticking to schedules is not something that was going to be possible. So yeah, it was inevitable, and I think we kind of saw it coming. But yeah, I hope to see it rearranged or some sort of solution, whether they go to Berlin or not.
The thing is for me is that it's really hit Formula E's plans on the head. I think what they were hoping for is that they could have possibly fit that race in August. If they had to delay it from June, I thought maybe they thought August would have been good. Same with London potentially, because we're expecting both London and New York to also be postponed and pushed back. So they may be thinking August, but now that means, Ed, that September is probably the earliest point that we will go racing.
Indeed, and of course there are rumours that we were talking about a few episodes before about the Asian leg to end out the season. But in general, I think the German government and Angela Merkel made the right call, and even in the UK, we've had the lockdown extended another 3 weeks, and there's more important stuff going on in the world right now. But I think we will get back to Formula one day. So it's the right move, but I think there's reasons for optimism for the future, like you said.
Yeah, as I said, it's sort of just Formula E's plans of probably racing sooner than they wanted to have probably been hit on the head and everything's been pushed back. But as I said, as we discussed yesterday, Formula E are very much open to racing into October now. So, and that means pushing back season 7 testing possibly into November, maybe even December, and then maybe starting the season in January. But I want to move on, because we've got plenty to discuss in today's episodes. And one of the things that we've been really looking forward to discussing, actually, is our top 5 craziest moments in Formula E. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you at home are like, how can you put Formula E's moments or crazy moments into just 5? Because surely every weekend is a crazy moment with the amount of just action that we get. But we've done it. To be fair, it took us a while to pick 5 because we went through quite a few, but we're going to start off with number 5 and then we're going to discuss it. So the 5th one that we went for was the Degrassi and Wehrlein finish in Mexico. Now, why that was crazy, it was just because of this, how it happened basically. Last lap, last 100 meters effectively to cross the line, Wehrlein running out of energy, the little cut chicane that Wehrlein did to sort of keep the lead, but then ultimately ran out of energy, and then Degrassi swerving past him to win. I think everyone's heart were in their mouths. Everyone was on the edge of their seat watching that. Ed, why did you help say that was our 5th pick?
Yeah, I think it's a good choice to have on the list, definitely. And Degrassi himself obviously would put it as one of his top. I think he said at the time it was his best Formula E win ever. I think he's had a lot of good wins, but he was pressuring. I remember he was pressuring Wehrlein pretty much throughout the entire. After the red flag for the Piquet Junior crash, he was pressuring Pascal Wehrlein for pretty much the entire race. And of course, there was the thing on Pascal that he'd just joined Formula a few races before, so there was obviously a lot on pressure on him. But I think a lot of people wanted to see Pascal Wehrlein become one of the best rookie since Rosenkrantz to win really early on into his Formula E career. So, and there was the moment where Wehrlein cut the chicane, which inevitably got him penalised after the race anyway. So him running out at the end almost didn't really matter because he was going to lose after the race anyway, which would have been probably more painful for him had Degrassi not just pipped him at the finish. But yeah, it really came down to the fine margins on track at least. And yeah, it was, especially having to wait so long after the red flag, it was worth the wait, really.
Yeah, and I suppose it's one of those races where, you know, it was a good race, but then we're coming down to that final lap and where everything's to play for, and then what happened and how it happened. It was just surreal. I remember watching it. I was on the edge of my seat. I couldn't believe what I just seen. I was like, now I've got to write a race report and I don't know where to start. And I'm like, that seems to happen a lot in Formula E every time the race finishes, but Mexico was just out of this world.
Yeah, it's motorsport. You don't often get these tight finishes. Usually, even in a great race, you'll see the person who eventually wins, they'll have a little bit of breathing room. So just to this kind of like drag race towards the end is just something you don't see very often at all in any form of motorsport. And yeah, just to see a rookie going up against kind of like an experienced champion, it was just, yeah, it's just something you don't see very often. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's Degrassi's best win. And I agree with Ed, yeah. In a way, for Verline, it's probably lucky that he got pipped at the end, because had he beaten Degrassi over the line and then had the penalty, I think that would have been really gutting. So, yeah, it's a great moment and just something you don't see very often, even in Formula E.
Yeah, indeed. So number 4 then. So number 4 was a toss-up because we were looking at the Season 1 Monaco crash. Now, a lot of probably OG Formula E fans will remember how crazy that was. But then when we were looking at crashes, we couldn't ignore the burn pile-up that happened last season, because that was just crazy. And it was very similar to the Monaco, because I remember I was there in Monaco Season 1, and we looked at that corner and we went, there's going to be a massive crash. And then, just like in Bern, all the drivers, all the media looked at that chicane and went, there's gonna be a massive crash. And all of a sudden, as soon as the race started, boom, red flag. Everyone apart from 3 drivers were involved with Will. It was just absolute craziness.
Yeah, this was pretty mad. And I think that there's actually been a change in Formula E to try and kind of eradicate these really tight chicanes, especially at the beginning, because of this crash. But yeah, it kind of, I think it got triggered by France kind of losing it going into that first corner, and he tipped one person. It was just like a domino effect, and just basically they all come slamming into this chicane, about 11 cars. I think a few of them get through. And yeah, it was about 45-minute wait for the race to get underway again. So like almost the entire length of the race, just in kind of waiting, sitting around. And yeah, it was madness. Luckily, when it did get restarted, it was a pretty good race, pretty good battle between Vern and Mitch Evans. But yeah, this was kind of, I mean, for something to happen quite rarely, quite fun, but also like you can see why Formula E would want to avoid it, because it was just mayhem.
Yeah, as part of that 45-minute wait was just moving all the cars because they were just completely stuck. So it's like, well, I've only got like 2 cranes. I can't move like 15 cars out of the way in like 5 minutes. But obviously some cars were able to drive off once, like Verline, because Verline got pinched in by Buemi against the wall. But yeah. Ed, what I was going to mention is, you know, back in the early season, Season 1, Season 2, Season 3, we did have Bob the Bollard, who was obviously just a Bollard, but was renamed Bob the Bollard because
our good friend Bob, yes.
Because Formula E drivers seem to always hit the bollard. But that was used in the chicane. So there was a little like escape route, but there might have been some sausage curbs that they would have had to go over, so they went slower. But then Formula E obviously put in these sort of like these massive Tech Pro barriers to actually like form these chicanes, which we sort of see in testing as well. That they don't have, you know, if they get it wrong in testing in Valencia, they hit a wall. They don't hit some cones or something. So do you think Formula E from that learned that maybe, you know, getting rid of these Tech Pro barriers and actually putting in these, going back to Bob the Bollard essentially, probably in future would be a better solution?
Maybe. I think that's certainly an interesting debate to have, whether they went for having Bob the Bollard, where you just go around the bollard. Like I remember particularly Berlin Season 2 at Karl Marx LE, that circuit they used, that A lot of front wings were collapsing and drivers were just missing the chicanes. But they almost, you have a point, they almost went too far the other way in some circuits. Like Bern was definitely one of them. Arguably, you could say Rome as well. There was a big pile up there that year too. With Bern was in the big delay. There was all the drivers were arguing at Scott Elkins, the race director, Degrassi, Massa, a couple of others who had made it through and gained some places in all the melee by cutting the chicane. Were saying, "Oh, why we did most of the lap? Why don't we get to keep the places that we gained at the restart?" And it was this big controversy in the race. I think Scott Elkins made the right choice in the end just to reset the grid order, because it would have been a mess, and you would have had the other drivers having a big fit about it as well if they'd gone the other way. So yeah, very controversial, very dramatic, and that's why it's on the list.
And so number 3. We went with, now, this probably will be controversial because this was probably Formula E's first big moment, and lots of people who have done these sort of lists before in previous seasons would have put this one at number 1, but we put it at number 3, and that is the Beijing Season 1 Heidfeld and Prost collision. I think now, over time, we've had some crazier moments than what it was. What made that moment so spectacular, Will, was because it was the first season and it got Formula E in newspapers, it got people talking about Formula E. It was probably the best PR stunt Formula E could have asked for. So I suppose that's why it is such an iconic moment for Formula E. But I think as time's gone on, now we're in season 6, I don't think it's the craziest moment we've ever seen.
Yeah, as you said, in terms of PR, it's pretty much kind of as good as Formula E could have hoped for in a very bizarre way. I mean, it's a well-known driver in Nick Heidfeld, in a just insane crash. It's one of those crashes sometimes you see in motorsport where you're just like, how is the person involved in this okay? Flipping his car 3 or 4 times, hitting a barrier. It was an enormous crash, and it's one of those that you still see and you're kind of still shocked, even though 5 years on that it's fine. But yeah, it was just a crazy incident to have, especially in your first race, in your first season. It was crazy. But as you say, yeah, we've had similar incidents since, and I think that it's always best that, I think a good step that Formula E is now more renowned for its exciting racing and overtaking perhaps than it is just for being like bumper cars or Mario Kart. So as much as I think this is a crazy incident, I'm glad that it's not our number 1 for that reason.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in that sense, Will. And the other thing is, Formula E got a lot of mileage out of this moment, to the point that was it Lewis Hamilton, the Formula 1 world champion, 6 times Formula 1 world champion actually, who saw it on Instagram or something and made a post about it 4 or 5 years later, reacting to it as if it had just happened, because obviously he doesn't keep up to date with Formula E. Maybe that's changed since. But yeah, that just sort of shows how it's still controversial. People still have a big opinion on it today, whether about, Nico Prost. And I think Hamilton said Nico Prost should get a penalty. And I think, well, Nico served that penalty 4 years ago, Lewis. Go easy on him. But yeah, I think everyone loved that moment, apart from, of course, maybe Nico Prost, for whom it was embarrassing, and Nick Heidfeld, who got launched through there and did barrel roll, which I was surprised he didn't get out so quickly and be ready to fight Nico Rossi. I think if that had just happened to me, I would want to have a lie down for a while, personally. But
yeah, I suppose you're right, though. It is such an iconic moment that it's still talked about today, and that was the first race ever in Formula E. And I think just because it was the first race ever in Formula E, it's why it's iconic, and it's why people still talk about it. And even now, if you were to show that in a clip somewhere, it might still bring in casual fans to Formula E. So I still think it serves a purpose, sadly, in terms of, obviously it's not great that it was a collision, but in terms of a PR event for Formula E and actually attracting people to Formula E, it probably still serves a purpose. So number 2 then, so we're getting into the juicy section now. So number 2, we went for the Buemi rant in season 3. Obviously in Montreal, it just a day basically where it just did not go his way, Ed, and he just melted after the race, absolutely fell apart.
yeah, it was quite dramatic and vitriolic, and so Buemi had a horrible day basically, and it was basically the weekend where he lost the championship to Lucas Degrassi. He'd been leading it before, he missed New York, and then he came in, crashed in practice, destroyed the tub, had to be repaired before the race, ended up getting him disqualified from that particular race anyway. But I mean, he put in a great drive, if I'm honest. He fought his way from the very back of the field. He carved his way through the field up to, I think, fourth, so he just missed out on the podium to Stefan Sarazan. Stefan Sarazan held him off at the end, and Degrassi won. And so Buemi, he'd been hit at the start by Freins, but he didn't. It was one of the Andretti's, so he didn't see which one it was. So he sees an Andretti driver, it's Da Costa, and he confronts Da Costa, and Da Costa is like, why are you having a go at me? I didn't do anything. And then he's like, oh, it was you, Robin. And then he starts on Robin, and that conversation. And I think Robin had a few choice. He basically threatened, like, next time I'll break more than just your wheel or something, was it? He said, or he threatened to break his car for even more seriously next time, I think was the thing. And then after that's over, you think it's over, and then Buemi, Daniel Abt, who Buemi had an incident with him in the pit lane, confronted him. So really, he went to war with everyone that day. He was taking no prisoners, and I think Buemi since has said that, look, that wasn't me. I was just angry. But it's certainly something that he's still known for, and I don't think he likes having it brought up. But it was definitely very entertaining and enthralling, dramatic, controversial, just all the things we like about Formula E.
Yeah, I think, Will, probably that stemmed from, because I'm thinking season 3, he probably should have been a back-to-back champion, but obviously missing that New York race, was so detrimental to him actually winning the championship. If he was there in New York, he would probably have been the first double champion, I believe. But, you have to be in it to win it, and Degrassi was in it to win it, and Buemi wasn't. So you can argue that Degrassi deserved it, obviously. But I just think, obviously, missing out on New York and then things not going his way, and he knew he had to play catch-up after missing 2 races in New York, and I just think the emotions boiled over.
Yeah, he's someone who kind of, I don't know if you could call it misfortune or just controversy, kind of followed around, especially in the first few seasons. If you think back to, the dramatic circumstances in which he missed out in season 1, and then the dramatic circumstances in which he succeeded in season 2, he could actually have been a triple champion had things gone his way. But as it is, he's not. So yeah, I can kind of see why frustration probably got the better of him in this situation. But at the same time, it's fantastic when we see a driver confront just one other driver. But to see him to get out the car and confront 3 other drivers is just very, very funny. And yeah, I can see that Buemi probably is a bit embarrassed by it now, but I think he's a driver who always brings great value on and off the track. So yeah, I thought it was hilarious.
I think enough time has passed now that we can probably joke about it. And if you probably brought it up to Buemi, you could probably bring it in more of a comedy element rather than.
Well, I'll let you test that, Jack.
You did this. I'll try it one day. We'll make a video and see if we can bring it as a joke one day. But I think knowing Buemi, he's a very passionate person, but he's also quite kind-hearted. He gives you a lot of time of his day. He's a very nice person, so I'm sure, just from the brief interactions and interviews that I've had with Buemi before, he'd be well up for a laugh. But anyway, so moving on to number 1. Now, yeah, I'm wondering, now that we've used the Beijing one, so you're probably wondering what we've picked, but we've gone for the season 2 title decider, involving Buemi and Degrassi again in London, and that huge crash going into technically turn 2. It was just amazing. I remember being in the media center, and I was like, there was talk about it. There was rumors. Is this going to be another Prost Senna? Is Degrassi going to hit Buemi off and he wins the championship? Because Degrassi was leading. If Buemi beat him, it was like 1 point, I believe it was. So if Buemi beat him, Buemi was on pole that day. If he beat Degrassi was ahead by 1 point. Apologies, I don't know if I said that the right way round. So if Buemi was out, it doesn't matter if Degrassi was out as well. Degrassi wins the title. And there was rumours. Not saying that was ever in Degrassi's mind, because I can't say that. I'm not saying, but there was talk. Could this happen? Could this actually happen? And then it happened. And we were like, what? I remember being in that media center, we couldn't believe it. The gasp, the shock of horror, it was just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's incredible. And you mentioned kind of like Prost and Senna, and it's almost like too predictable. It's like it's too shocking that you think, oh, this surely can't happen, but for it to play out how it did is incredible. And yeah, I think in the end, the fact that Buemi managed to kind of come back and be the victor is probably kind of justice done. I don't know if Degrassi did it on purpose or not, and I think you got to probably give him the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, I mean, what a fantastic way to finish a championship in London at Battersea Park. It's just, yeah, it's incredible. One of those kind of like surreal moments in motorsport. Regardless of the fact that it's kind of like from a burgeoning championship.
Yeah, and for me, Ed, I remember that race, and I'm sure you will as well. In terms of, I remember in the media centre, I was there, and obviously both cars, they didn't retire from that race. Degrassi was probably worse off actually from the collision than Buemi, because obviously he completely broke his suspension, whereas Buemi just lost his rear wing. Buemi tried to continue because downforce, obviously it didn't matter. The car still could have gone round, but the FIA called him in.
And they were just flagged him, yeah.
Yeah, they were just sitting in the garage. And then obviously the championship came down to fastest lap. And if Buemi got the fastest lap, he would have won the title. If Degrassi obviously got the fastest lap, he won the title. So it became a fastest lap battle as well. So even that, the crash was crazy. But even the way the title was then decided was crazy, because they were sitting in the pit lane. They were right in front of each other. The tension was there. Everyone was just looking out the media window to see when they were going to exit the pit, to find out when they've actually gone out on track. It was just crazy.
It certainly was, and it was a bit hard because I remember being in the stands trackside and seeing them go by, and it was a little hard to explain to like some of the candidates. I remember some guy who came in with his young son, to watch the race, and it is really hard to. He didn't really know much about Formula E, so it's difficult trying to explain to them the situation in the championship, how it was going to be decided by fastest lap. Because people are vaguely familiar with motor racing, they're not used to like Formula One until last year, because they hadn't had a point for fastest lap for years, and they hadn't, let alone have it decide a championship. So the other thing I really remember was, like you say, seeing the wounded cars struggle back to the pits, especially Degrassi with the wheel just pointing the wrong way compared to the other wheel. And I was seeing them. It was really noticeable when they were going for a fastest lap as well, because you really heard the motor in that Audi, at Scheffler, Degrassi whirring. And Buemi was really fast in qualifying, and you'd see Prost and all the others who were doing their normal race, and then Buemi would come along, he'd do a very slow lap, and then he'd come in, boom, and be gone before you'd notice. And it really made a big impression on me, and it was definitely very tense, a very unusual title decider, I think. But I think that uniqueness almost plays into its favour, and that's probably why we've got it at the top of the list. There are definitely bigger, more crashes with more cars, more crazy incidents, but I think that Buemi-Degrassi rivalry, those two personalities and the clash of them, that was something that really defined not just that end of season 2, but I think the first 3 seasons of Formula E. But yeah, definitely fond memories of that crazy decider in Battersea.
Yeah, and I suppose that moves us on beautifully for our next topic, which we're going to go back. So obviously, me and Ed, back in season 1 and season 2, there was this big upheaval of the Battersea Park race in London, and obviously the residents weren't happy, and there was a massive battle in courts, in local governments for the race to actually go ahead. And Ed, I'm going to pass on to you, because you really spearheaded this project in terms of on being on not on the resident side, but you were on that sort of understanding of theirs, whereas Formula E was sort of fighting against it. You sort of understood both sides of the argument quite well.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. I was sort of unusual for me. I was sort of the mediator in the situation, which is perhaps people who know me would not normally expect that, knowing how I usually am, quite heart on my sleeve kind of guy. But yeah, so let's explain first off how the race came about. So Formula E were keen on having a race in London right from day one. Initially, Alejandro Agag, CEO of Formula E at the time and now chairman, he wanted London as the season opener, but that didn't end up working out, so he ended up having it as the season finale. And so why did they choose Battersea? It was the first choice of venue. Alejandro Gag used to live near the park, and he said he'd go there with his children, and he sort of had this fantasy dream, maybe dream is a more appropriate word, of turning it into a racetrack somehow on the ring road, which is interesting because the ring road, if you look at it, it's quite narrow and it's crowned. So it's sort of one of those things, maybe when your kids are playing on it, it seems a lot bigger. When you're actually there, it's quite narrow and kind of difficult to overtake. But anyway, but it also avoided the whole problem of having to close roads on London, which, as you can imagine, would be very disruptive, not just to commuters, but also to business, having to close roads, close businesses around them. Interestingly enough, the backup venue, in case Battersea fell through, that was the XL Centre in Docklands. But again, like I said, had this personal connection with Battersea. That was always the first choice. Initially, Wandsworth Council turned them down. That's the local council in Battersea. And they just thought it was going to be too impractical, it would have been too risky. And what changed their mind was they got a certain conservative politician who was the mayor of London at the time, sent in an incredibly verbose and lengthy email to the head of Wandsworth Council.
Which was Boris Johnson.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I was trying to avoid actually saying his name, but yeah, that was him, Jack. And the word I always remember in the email, he said basically, he waffled on a lot, like I'm saying, but he said it would be in your best interest, basically, to hold the race in Battersea. I think "in your best interest" is the quote that really stood out to me. And you can sort of imagine it from his point of view. He was seeing it like, his version of the London Olympics. This is what he was going to stamp his mark on. He was friends with Gag. He was personal friends with him. I'm not sure if they still are, but whatever. So why was it in the council's interest? Because Formula E paid them. The council afterwards, because they held the race for 2 years, they ended up holding it for 2 years, and they were paid, I think, £2.85 million by Formula E, essentially. Or they got 2.85 million out of the deal.
And this was part of Formula E's initiative. In the first season, they wanted to leave a legacy. They wanted to leave a legacy at every place. So it wasn't just, we're coming in, we're doing a race, and then we're going away. So there was sort of some benefits. Because obviously Formula E, in the first 2 seasons, they needed to persuade host cities to actually, be part of the championship, and by doing that, giving them funds to actually improve facilities, because the area around Battersea Park and Wandsworth did get a lot of money, and they did use that to improve the facilities. It wasn't that money wasn't just put away to the side. Wandsworth did actually use that money to improve facilities elsewhere in the borough and at Battersea Park itself. So that's why Formula E were giving Wandsworth Council at the time money, and hence also why Boris Johnson said that it is in your best interest, because you're going to get this money from Formula E and you can use that anyway best fit to improve the facilities in your borough.
I agree that was the plan. That was certainly the idea, and that was how they sold, one of the ways they sold the idea to the public. Another important thing to mention is in the contract there was a break clause. So it was supposed to be for 5 years, but there was an option. Every year they would sort of review, the council at least would review it, and both ends, Formula E and the council, had an option where if either side felt things weren't working out, they could pull out and end the deal prematurely. They wouldn't have to fulfill the entire contract if they didn't want to. And so that's a key thing to keep in mind. Another thing, just this is a small thing, but in August 2014, Formula E did a secret test with Lucas Degrassi in the park at 4 a.m. in the morning. So nobody was awake. They put the barriers up. They did one run with Degrassi. He basically did a lap. And because nobody woke up, they used that as sort of proof of concept to help sell, another thing to help sell the race. The fact, look, we didn't wake anyone up. That proves that we're not going to be a loud, noisy, disruptive event. That was one of our gang speak things. And to me, that's a little disingenuous, because if you've ever been to a Formula E event, it's not just the cars making noise. There's the EJ pumping out his tunes. You've got the TV helicopter whirring overhead. So to me, it was a little disingenuous. So the deal was agreed. So far, so good, right? You think? And in early 2015, they started construction, because obviously it wasn't just putting on the barriers and stuff. They had to lay down extra tarmac for the chicanes to make so the FIA could approve the circuit for the level that Formula E needed to race at the time, which I believe was grade 3.
This was the problem that the residents had, if I remember correctly, because they say they weren't properly consulted on the actual event, but when they started seeing those diggers come in and actually dig up a bit of the grass to then become tarmac, that's when this whole resident thing and this whole war with Formula E that lasted 2 years really got underway.
Maybe war's a strong word, but thinking back, yeah, it did feel a bit like kind of, well, they took it very personally. And because when they saw John Fox, who was the guy who started it all, he was a local surveyor. He woke up one morning, looked out the window, saw these diggers in the park. And when he shared this thing around, and it sort of, it didn't exactly go viral, but in the local community, it certainly did. And they all really clutched onto that. It was like, our park is being attacked. It's almost like they felt a bit of their, this place that they cherished and went to every day was being, altered, and they feared it would be like that some of the damage might not be able to be repaired. So that's how initially it was called Save Battersea Park. Later they renamed themselves to Battersea Park Action Group. So this is where young 19-year-old university student Edward Hunter, yours truly, gets involved. So the first race went ahead. I went and I had a great time. But there are a lot of negative news stories surrounding the event. And specifically, one of the things I really upset was the month-long construction period. And the residents complained it was really chaotic and disorganized. There's like kids going through the park nearly getting run over by heavy goods vehicles. They also didn't like the fact that there were like 400 HGVs making journeys there and back to get all the bits of concrete in. So I was hearing about this, and my first impression was that, honestly, at the time, I felt they were being a bit ignorant and petty, really. And I was spoiling it for Formula E fans in a way. But my student hall, it wasn't far away. So I heard about these local meetings they're holding at a place called Ethelberger Community Centre, which is right next to the park. And usually it's just used for like children's parties. I remember when I actually got there was like balloons still in the ceiling from party 3 hours before. I sort of put out an olive branch to the residents. I wanted to hear their side of the story, at least hear them out. And so the first meeting I went to, I remember it was 23rd of October 2015. I went in full Mahindra gear, bright red, so couldn't have stuck out like more of a sore thumb at all. And I went there sort of expecting, all right, I'll come in, I'll sign up. And I told them I was coming beforehand as well. They'll listen to what I have to say, they'll laugh, or they won't be impressed, and eventually they'll tell me to go away, basically. There'll be one meeting, and I probably won't come back. And against all expectations, I went in, sat down. I've got a few odd looks, naturally. And but they were all really nice. They were welcoming. And I remember what really set the tone. The guy chairing the meeting was a guy called Professor Paul Eakins. And he was a really nice guy. I remember he started off, said, this is what we're going to talk about today. And also thanks to Ed Hunter, who's joined us today. He's a Formula E fan, and he's come to hear us out. And he says, so basically, let's hear what he has to say. Let's take him seriously. Be nice, guys. And he didn't have to do that. And so I really appreciated that. Despite having, got off to a rocky start, actually, things went really well, to be honest, with them. I mean, it wasn't... we disagreed a lot, obviously. I mean, we were coming from like completely different perspectives. I'm a Formula E fan, they're not. And the problem is they don't know very much about Formula E fans, because I thought, right, if I can fill them in, and at least, they know what they're talking about, then they don't make a fool of themselves. And hopefully, what I was thinking is that this has to end with Formula E negotiating. There has to be some kind of discussion and dialogue between Formula E and the residents. And if I'm the guy that sort of, starts that off and opens them up to the idea, then, maybe I've done my bit.
So then there was all the discussions, which then you went to and so forth. And then it came down to this court meeting where the local government wanted to, obviously Wandsworth Council had a meeting, and this was to decide basically whether to carry on or to break the contract. And we were both there at that meeting. As along with other press people. We were both there, and there was a discussion back and forth. The residents that you were talking to at these meetings, they came in, they made their discussions, but it didn't really seem to sway the council at all. So the council decided not to break the contract and actually then continue the 5-year period. So basically, Battersea Park should have been on the calendar till season 5. Because the council, they allowed the contract to go through. So it should have been there. So just to sort of wrap up the story, how did the residents in effect then sort of stop because Formula E pulled out. The end of the story is Formula E pulled out. They said, fine, we won't race here, we'll find another location. So just run us through how the residents actually talked to Formula E, and Formula E said, fine, we'll pull out of the contract despite us having a written agreement now to say that we have the right to race there till season 5.
In the meetings, they talked about legal action for a long... I remember asking them about it, and they said basically, look, it's on the table, but we don't want to do it unless there's a last resort. Because as you can imagine, taking legal action, it costs a lot of money, and it's even more expensive if you lose. And these guys, they were the underdogs, especially early on. They didn't really expect that they would win. After those meetings that we were talking about in 2016, Jamie Jackson, who was a local, a blind author and one of the guys there, he did this legal crowdfunding campaign. He hired a QC who had a lot of experience with like noise complaints and motorsport teams. And so everything was heading towards this court case, yeah. And you've got to remember the context at the time. Formula E had just lost the Moscow E-Prix as well. That was originally on the season 2 calendar, and it was quite midway through the season that got cancelled by the Russian government, basically. So if the council lost in court, then Formula E would have lost the season finale. I think a lot of Formula E fans do not realise just how close it came to having the championship end prematurely in season 2. We could have had it end after Berlin, and it would have gone in favour of Degrassi that year in season 2 because he was a point ahead going into that Battersea weekend. So Agag met with the residents in secret and did a deal. Nobody, even I didn't know about it. And so the deal was that they'd let them hold the last event in 2016, and then Formula E wouldn't come back. And it was obviously a hard deal for the gang to sell to the teams and stuff because they really like going to London Battersea. But the deal was, okay, we'll come back next year at a different venue. And of course, that didn't end up happening. It took several years for them to agree together. Excel, basically, which is what I was pushing for. One of the things that I got the residents to push for as well, which I think was one of the more effective things that they campaigned for. Because it wasn't just, well, we want Formula E to be cancelled. It was, hey, we don't hate Formula E. We think Excel would be a way better place for it. And that's a much more positive way to campaign, in my opinion. So it ended in a compromise. And so it didn't fully satisfy either side. And like I said, they kept it secret from me, which was a little bit surprising when I found out like the day before the court case was supposed to happen. But overall, I feel like it ended in the best possible way. And, there was a lot of passion, a lot of, emotion boiling over either side of the argument. I had some people who criticized, my actions. It made me really think, did I do the right thing in, supporting these people? But I have to say, looking back, I feel like the way it ended, that was the best way it could have ended, in my opinion. Without having to go to court. I feel like that justified what I did.
Yeah, I remember it was crazy. It was a mad time. I remember going to the meetings and listening in, and then from that on, I was able to fill in the public about what was actually going on with London. It's a shame, really, because I thought it was a great track. Yes, the main problem really was the month lead-up period. The month lead-up period was the main issue. Because obviously the event was taken down in 3 days, and that's the main problem that every Formula E race has now, is that 3-week build-up process. Because it's not just a one-day event. It sells itself as a one-day event, in and out, but you're not really in and out. And every city that hosts a Formula E race will know that you're not in and out. You've got the 3-day clear-up period, and you've got the 2-3 week setup period. And whether Formula E have gotten quicker in that in terms of setting up an event, I don't know. But it normally takes about 3 weeks set up, but they're able to take it down in 3 days. I want to say thank you, boys, for today's show. Pleasure as always. Thank you, Ed.
Oh, cheers, Jack. That was a lot of fun.
Will, thanks once again.
Yeah, thanks. And as someone who wasn't involved with Formula E Zone back in season 1, it was fascinating to hear the kind of process that Ed went through, trying to broker that agreement.
It was not easy, Will. It was not easy.
It was a challenging time, let me tell you. But thank you so much for watching. The esports event starts at 3:30 tomorrow. You can watch it on all the social media, Twitch, YouTube, on the FIA Formula E stuff. We will see you on Monday to dissect it all. You've been watching the FEZ show. We will see you next week. Goodbye.
And don't forget to like and subscribe.